Hello and welcome to tonight's SATE debate on the exam system in Scotland. We have a fantastic show for you tonight where a panel of talking heads are going to debate whether we need to keep the current exam system, change it fundamentally or chuck it entirely and move to something else. So we're going to be talking about qualifications, the recent sort of debacle over exams from the SQA and what the future looks like. We have no more insights into exactly what you're meant to be doing with your students, but we are going to talk about what we think you should be doing. Okay, really quickly to run through everything today. This is actually a rescheduled event. I have to apologize to everyone who's watching. I was involved in a serious mountain rescue emergency last week, and as I was taking off in a helicopter, I managed to send a tweet or two out to say I wouldn't be there and it was cancelled, but I apologise if you didn't get that message, and we're expecting to see us last Thursday. Really quickly, SATE is the Scottish Association for the Teaching of English. We're part of NATE, which is a UK-wide organisation, the National Association for the Teaching of English. This is being broadcast on various platforms, Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. But please, if you're on any of those, subscribe to the SATE channel. That'll give you the best way to keep up to date with when our sessions are being broadcast. Quickly, our panel today, the first person on our panel is James McEnaney. He's a former secondary school teacher who now lectures in further education and teaches a range of qualifications, including Higher and National 5. You may know him better from his sort of public-facing work as a journalist, specialising in Scottish education and freedom of information in general. Our next panellist is Isabel Boyd. Isabel Boyd has had a long and varied career in Scottish education, starting off as a class teacher and ending up as a senior education leader in the local authority. She's established Core Ad Core and is a founder member of Exam Scot, as is James, who we just spoke about. Well, great. It's great to have Isabel along today. We also have Harold Raitt, another member of the Exam Scot programme, which we'll discuss later on. He's a producer, a writer and a filmmaker. He's been involved in different types of schools and different types of organisations, including the National Theatre, and has created educational resources on various different texts. He currently works as a copywriter, designer and digital marketer, and is also instrumental in Exam Scot. Sammy McHugh is a PT of English. She has been a teacher for over 20 years and is interested in literacy across learning and empowerment through education and CPD. She's a co-founder and one of the hosts of the excellent Twitter account at English Scotland, which is a platform for English and primary teachers to chat and talk about CPD in English and literacy. And a last-minute replacement, hopefully he won't embarrass himself. Raymond Soltasek has been an educator for 4 decades as an instructor, an English teacher, a principal teacher, assistant head, and also a lecturer in ITE, in initial teacher education. He is also the coordinator of SATE, that's that programme you're watching right now, and is involved in developing the work of NATE in Scotland. Next, quickly, we're going to talk about what we're going to talk about today. So a few things have happened quite recently. So the Priestley review was a review into the exams in 2020, and it made recommendations to the Scottish Government, which have mostly been accepted. I'm sure we were all watching on tenterhooks as Swinney made an announcement on the 2021 exams, cancelling again for a second year running the National 5 exams, but keeping, apparently, hopefully, the higher exams in 2021. And we were hoping by now we would have some more detail on the SQA plans for 2021. I'm sure it is a matter of some controversy that we haven't seen those yet. We're hoping today to sort of break ourselves up into 2 sections, one on analysis of what exams are in the present, and a little bit of advocacy, I'm sure, from many of our guests today on what the future of exams should be. So, with all that much ado about nothing, I'm going to bring in each of our speakers and add them to the stream. So welcome to Raymond. Hi, Raymond. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Fantastic. James, nice to see you.
All right, how you doing?
Not too bad. Isabel, how are you?
Great. Good evening.
Fantastic. Harold, you're next.
Good evening from Kelso.
See you. How are you?
Hi. I'm well, thanks.
And just to introduce myself, my name's Tom Coles. I am going to be your host tonight. I'm going to try and avoid getting too stuck in. Just quickly, we are aiming to have a question and answer session at 7:15 tonight. someone there's got an echo. If they could try and get rid of it, that'd be great. We'll have a question and answer session, but please ask any questions you have as we go along, and we'll try and address them as we go along. And please make sure to follow us on Twitter at SateFeed. I'll put the hashtag up in a second, but it is the hashtag SateDebate. Okay, so let's get rid of this and bring us all back in. We are getting started today, and I'd really like to start up on this question. The first question of what do exam and qualification systems do? What do they do to teachers? What do they do to young people? How do they make you feel? How do they affect the environment in a classroom? I suppose we go for Sammy as the kind of representative of classroom teachers. What do you think exam systems do and qualification systems do?
I mean, I know they're supposed to be the gold standard, and they're supposed to be the chance for pupils to evidence all the learning. But increasingly, I think they've become really, really stressful. And I think they've become a measure of a test of memory, and also, in some respects, a test of privilege. Because a lot of pupils, I think, are increasingly becoming marginalised in the way we prepare for exams. That's pretty much how I see it at the moment.
Yeah, I'm going to switch over to James. James, what do you think exam systems do, or do you want to respond to Sammy?
Certainly the way it is just now, the exam system damages the education that we're able to provide to our students by restricting what we can do and forcing us into coaching towards an exam instead of teaching. And fundamentally, I suppose the exam system as it is allows us to lie to ourselves that we have this nice kind of equitable system where everything's equal and everyone sits the same exam under the same conditions and all that. It's all lies, it's all nonsense. But it's apparently an important lie that we are very keen to hold on to.
It's all lies, an important lie. Harold, I'm jumping to you. We can have a few people jumping in, but I'm just choosing people to get us started.
I think one of the things that it does in Scotland is it marks a really significant divide between primary and secondary school. My most recent experience in Scotland has been doing part of a PGDE at Dundee in primary education, and their curriculum for excellence is really the centre of what the primary school is doing. Quite obviously, as soon as you go into secondary school, everyone starts to focus. They've got this focus on the exams, and actually that's meant that curriculum for excellence is used every day by primary school teachers across Scotland. And as soon as you move into secondary school, there are larger numbers of secondary teachers who never really look at it at all, think it's completely irrelevant. And so there's this fundamental lack of joined up thinking, which also moves across into not having N5 and higher subjects that actually align with the faculties quite in the way that curriculum for excellence might have suggested.
Fantastic, Isabel. So it's a break on necessary reforms and important reforms like curriculum for excellence.
Well, I don't think exams in and of themselves are intrinsically bad or negative or at a major disadvantage, because in fact examinations can be a very useful learning tool and a useful learning activity, particularly if they are formative and diagnostic. If I'm the class teacher and I set an exam for my group and everyone in the class gets question 6 wrong, then I'm saying to myself, well, what was it around question 6 and what can I do differently? However, we're in the unfortunate position that what we're talking about tonight really is about that kind of summative assessment, and it really is a all in, all out kind of approach, and that's where it kind of falls down. So all that great work around assessment and work that teachers do in the classroom that is diagnostic and formative is all lost because it becomes purely what happens on that day at that time. And I think what we've seen in 2020, well, it wasn't news, I don't think, to many of us. It just confirmed what we knew, and there's actually inbuilt intrinsic disadvantage in the system.
Fantastic. So too much summative, not enough formative, Raymond. Not enough assessment is for learning anymore.
I think you've left me last because I can't misbehave, Tom, and just agree with everyone. Absolutely. And I think what's also important to remember is that I think exams also operate as a cheap and cheerful accountability measure of schools and teachers. That we can look at results, we can grade them in league tables in the media, and encourage the media to do that. Simply as a tool with which we can hold teachers accountable. It doesn't really say much about what kids can and cannot do. It doesn't provide what Isabel was talking about in terms of any kind of diagnostic plan for going forward. All it does is provide a measure for what happens at this moment in time, and then we can batter teachers about the head with it.
Fantastic. That was a fast-paced first 5 minutes on one question. It's very question time here. You know, I wonder who's the planted nutter. We'll find out later. So the next point is, I guess it's very subtly different to what they do, but what are they for? So I guess we were talking about slightly getting onto that with holding teachers accountable. Do they hold young people accountable for their learning? Do they sort young people? Do they provide any function for society, for employers, for universities? Sometimes these are the arguments we hear. James, you want to jump in there? You can, yeah.
I think one of the main things that they're for, certainly the system that we have just now, where everything must sort of, as we saw in the summertime, must sit within the curve, you know, is that the system is actually a big part of what this system is there to do is fail people. That's the thing, right? A major part of this system that we have is predicated on the fact that we will set out at the start and say, no matter what, we are going to fail a certain number of students. And I don't know about the rest of you. That's not why I wanted to be a teacher. And I don't think that's a fair way to approach things. So there's that on the one hand. The other thing is that I say we tell ourselves, you know, this idea that what these exams do is they show us what a student can do. Or maybe people have convinced themselves that they show us, you know, what potential a student has. And maybe there are aspects of the exams that do, but once we get into this mad system that we have of how we grade it, all of that gets obliterated as well. Let's say you want to be an English teacher, right? You have to have passed higher English. You want to be any teacher, you've got to have passed higher English. So somebody gets 51% and they can go and be a teacher. Somebody gets 49% and they fail. And we're supposed to believe that actually that 2% variance is somehow some actual accurate measure of what these people can do. It's nonsense. But as Raymond says, it's convenient. We're not really prepared in this country to put the resources into education that we always say we are. And as a consequence, we require a system that is fairly cheap, that lets us kind of bumble along, looking like we're quite efficient and not really cause too many problems for the people in charge who, as I have made clear over the past few months, I do not think should be in charge. And so the system exists in order to maintain itself in many ways as well.
So the higher isn't the gold standard, it's bargain basement. Is that the case?
No, it's not. I'll teach higher English. If that's what I'm getting paid to do, I'll teach you higher English. But it's not a good course, and it's not a good measure of how people are able to engage with language.
I just feel that increasingly, feel that increasingly exams are for everyone except the pupils. I just feel as if the pupils are put under so much pressure. They do their absolute best. Parents do their best, but I just feel as if it's not for them. It's for employers. It's for universities. It's for national statistics. It's not fair, and it really is time it was looked at, so that we can have a fair system.
I mean, I think we've got to remember that the higher was originally only a university entrance qualification. That's historically what it was. And it's only as more and more young people have been staying on at school through ROSLA in the 70s and through the move towards post-16 kids staying in school that we've had to think about what is available for them. What do we have on the books for them? And as a result, we've please pardon the use of the word, but we've bastardized that the course over and over again in order to accommodate that ever rising cohort, instead of investigating all the other ways in which we could find sensitive ways of really measuring what kids can do, their skills across the board, whether vocational or academic or social or personal. We've just stuck this gold standard label on the higher and preserved it, as James says, preserved it no matter what.
So it's a B-worded, and I think that's a quotation from Much Ado About Nothing, Raymond. But it's a bastardized version of an ancient system, an elite system. If anyone wants to speak to that, we could maybe move on to the next question.
A couple of things I think are important in here, Tom. And what I think the current exam system does, it doesn't do the things that Raymond and all of us would like. It doesn't pick up anything to do with the social skills, the personal skills, those real life skills of children and young people. It's really about a way of separating the wheat from the chaff. It's a simple data sorting exercise for next step. And for many young people, just because the way the system that we've allowed the system, I'm never going to say devised, the way in which the system has been allowed to, just mutate, I think would be the right word, then actually what we're doing is we're saying we need to keep doing it. And if you look at the statistics that the government themselves publish and look at when your young people leave school, and by and large, almost, well over 60% of them stay on till S6, and yet we insist that they do this formal end exam in S4, then some in S5, and then some in S6. It makes absolutely no sense and is really out of step with almost all other education systems.
Harold, do you want to come in?
I'm also not. Sammy says that it's for it's not really for pupils, it's for employers and things like that. I'm not really sure how much it is for employers. I've worked as a resource producer in various different third sector organisations for 15 years. I've hired a lot of people. I don't really look that carefully at what they get for GCSEs or N5s or higher and A levels. And for most application processes, I'm putting together my own tests, my own interview questions, my own assessment, so that I can see what the people can do. Quite often, because the things that I'm actually looking for as a filmmaker, as a writer, or as a designer, as a producer of resources, haven't been measured by any of the processes thus far, anyway.
Well, I think you must be a great employer then, Harold, because that's fantastic. But I know lots and lots of pupils who they maybe want to be an apprentice and they need to get, an A or a B in National 5. And these are kids who they would be excellent apprentices, but they struggle to get that academic grade to get them there.
Isn't that's just the thing though, so employers are in a position where, they need to say something. It's like Isabel was saying, the system works in order to kind of like separate people out. Employers are in a position where if they want to offer an apprenticeship, they need some kind of way to figure out. The only thing that we really give them to work with is these exam results. Universities, this idea that, we need to maintain the system so that universities can do an entry system. Well, there are two ways to look at that. One of them is we could offer them something much, much better. Than that. The other maybe side of that is if the universities are really, really set on there being like this kind of effectively system of entrance exams, well, let them bloody well build one then. At the end of the day, right, this idea that we should have the education that students get in high school, in all school, and right the way through high school, completely dominated and tied down by the fact that we need to produce some grades at the end of it so that we can sort some kids out and put them into different channels. And then, as I say, you're still assuming that the information contained in those grades is actually valuable. And I don't really believe that's the case at all, certainly when you're at the margins. It's an entire system it's just a big house of cards. There's no real substance to any of this system that we depend upon just now, but it's so important, apparently, that we don't rock the boat on it, that it's everything. It's a Scottish system. It's our gold standard. We've got to be seen to be using these wonderful, robust systems that we have and telling ourselves that's the case. It's all lies. It's a whole system.
And it's weighing the baby as well. You can weigh the baby, it doesn't make it put on the weight. And I just think, what would happen if we took exams away completely? Would the talent that's there, would the ability that's there disappear? Is that what exams do? Do they make ability and talent appear? Or would kids actually have this anyway? And therefore, what are they actually there for?
Yeah. Plus, remember, I mean, if you don't know if you remember, if anyone's watching remembers, but like a few months ago, I did a story with I think it was the Times, and it was to do with the number, the average numbers of hires people were leaving school with across the country. So the 20% richest areas in Scotland, pupils are more likely from them to leave with 5 hires than pupils from the 20% poorest are to leave with 1. So unless somebody's going to try and convince me that kids in the richest areas, in the sort of, admittedly one of the areas that I grew up in, are 5 times as good, have 5 times as much potential, are 5 times as capable of going on to uni or going on to apprenticeships, going and doing things. Somebody wants to make that argument to me, I am all ears, but it's going to take a hell of an argument to convince me that it's even in the ballpark of being true. So the system clearly isn't working.
And
I'm not sure I'd argue with you, James. I can barely moderate you. We'll move on to the next question, if that's okay. I think you're dragging it in as well here. It's a really important one. It's this question of who do exam systems, especially exam systems, but I guess qualification systems in general, who do they benefit and who do they exclude? Because there is an argument that exam systems were brought in because it was no longer legitimate for father to pass on to son the privileges of that they'd inherited. We don't accept inheritance anymore. But actually, when we look at the statistics, it turns out that people tend to inherit.
Have you looked at the cabinet?
Yes, and yes, if you look at the socioeconomics behind results, it's
Yeah, I mean,
if that was the target, it hasn't happened.
Go on, Raymond.
So, I saw there was an article, I think it was in the Test today, about the cultural bias in GCSE exams, the language paper, how pupils were asked to, for example, describe their home life, which instantly discriminates against kids who are in care. It asks kids to write about a skiing holiday, and obviously I think there's an inbuilt cultural bias in any exam when it's set by middle class professionals, or even people who used to be working class to become middle class professionals. There's a bias in there that privileges one against another. I would like, though, to remind, I mean, I was involved in the previous discussion that we had in SATE. I'd like to remind everyone about a point that Melina Valder-Lievra made about the exam system benefiting children, benefiting young people from Black and ethnic minorities, because it's an anonymous test, and therefore any cultural bias that might take place within a system that is systemically racist, systemically discriminatory, can be mediated against. So I think we ought to be aware that yes, if we want to do away with exams, there will have to be work done to ensure that things like that don't happen, that we can mediate against that.
Harold would like to jump in, I think.
Yeah, they exclude the people, as one of our Exam.Scot blogs said earlier in the year, Melvin Ruff, I think. They exclude the people who aren't who don't do well on the day, one single day in June or of a particular summer. And it's a bizarre thing that other important exams now in life we can retake. Melvin used the example of a driving exam. We want to know that people who are on our roads are capable drivers, but some people take quite a long time to get to that stage. I had to do quite a lot of lessons before I got to that stage, and you've got the chance to retake it. Now, it seems that for the core things, maths, and literacy, those should be a pass mark, where you can say that you've passed to a certain standard, and that you're going to be able to go into a company, you're going to be able to write an email decently, you're going to be able to add up and make spreadsheets happen in a sensible way. But that I think everything else beyond that should be an exam that you can retake as many times as you want until you get to the stage where you've passed that. A similar thing could be like with the advanced driving tests for people who want to do that, and they can take them again. Possibly they have to retake them at some point. Everything else, I think, is on the table in terms of whether we actually need the exams for that. Because Sammy's right. As an employer, I absolutely did use the GCSE and university in particular to exclude people, just as a simple way of lessening a shortlist, and that's unacceptable. We've got to move to a circumstance where we prize people for who they are and the different life journeys that they go through.
It seems absolutely. Sorry, I just think it just seems to me to be beyond the realms of understanding. Here we are in the, in 2020, we talk about artificial intelligence. We can send people to the moon. We're now found water. We think we can go to Mars, and we can't find a system where we can actually capture what young people can do. It just seems to me that, and it's that kind of old adage, where there's a will, there's a way. And it seems to me what we seem to be lacking is the will. Because the current system works for the status quo. And if we want to be the advocates for change and radical change, then our voices have to be heard, because the status quo is not good enough. And in terms of the question that you asked, Tom, the current system benefits the better off, and it excludes anybody who is the least bit different. It excludes children and young people in poorer areas, and it excludes people who have. Think about it. You think about young people we've all taught. I've never been an English teacher. I've been married to one for 40 years, if that counts. But I've taught in schools. So, I've taught in schools, and I know I've had kids in my class who are really skilled and really brilliant in particular things, and the exams don't capture it. Or even if they're particularly skilled and brilliant at some skills, if you take sport or any kind of the practical subjects, and then suddenly, to get that gold standard higher PE, you have to write all the essays. What on earth for?
Yep.
All that seems to me to see that's who they exclude.
Do you know who I think they exclude as well?
One of the comments, if that's okay. There's a bit of an echo. Apologise for that. GW, I made him rewrite this because he'd named the local authority previously, but he said, look at certain affluent local authorities. Great results and a high number of students going to uni, but the highest dropout rates at uni. They're trained to pass exams, but incapable of coping when asked to think alone. Go on, James. Yeah.
Can I name the local authority?
It's up to you.
The thing is, right, I mean, we all know which local authority we're talking about, don't you? The thing is, right, the system, this education system, people have got this idea, I think the education system is separate from everything else. The education system, like every other system, works for who it works for, and that is always going to be the people in charge. So, unsurprisingly, the system works for the kids of the people who make all the choices, because in Scotland, the people who make all the decisions are all at the very least middle class, and the people who really, really make choices in this country are all on cushy $100,000 a year jobs. So you end up in a situation whereby, that's what I said earlier on, the system just exists ultimately by this stage just to protect itself in many ways. And as a consequence of that, you get what we're talking about here. See, the thing about, like the exams don't measure things properly and isn't really working. So I teach in a college. I teach hires, national fives, etc. in a college, right? People come into my classes, and our pass rates are over the last, say, 4 or 5 years since new results come in, our pass rates are a good chunk above the national average. And they shouldn't really be if you think about the cohort that we have. But the thing is that realistically, if the exam system worked properly, if it actually did the things it claims to do on the tin, I would not have a job, because my job wouldn't need to exist. So the very fact that people go through school, and they go through maybe like 6 years of high school, and then they leave the school without a higher English, that it turns out that they need to go and be a teacher or something like that. And they come into my class, and they come in there for a year, and I'll teach them. At the end of that, pass rates are very, very good, and the vast majority of them are going to get a higher. They shouldn't need to. These are people, these are kids who have been failed, students who have been failed by a system. Now, okay, you make the argument saying there should always be second chances, and there should, right? But these students shouldn't need to be going through, they shouldn't need to be spending extra years to get to the same point other people are at, because the system that they've been shoved through is so absolutely bloody god awful at actually measuring the things that they can do and recognising their ability and recognising their potential. And we just allow this to happen, because at the end of the day, the people making the decisions on it, it's dead easy for everyone to say how much they care. And it's dead easy for everyone to say they want big radical change, or they want the education to be a top priority, or all that kind of stuff, right? This is my 10th year in education. I've seen nothing in those 10 years and nothing in the last 5, and I've also been a journalist, that's actually really convinced me that any of that rhetoric's true. Not at a system level, and not amongst people who are making choices.
Harold wants to come in here.
Do you think?
Harold and Sammy, yeah.
Okay.
I think coming back to GW's original point on this about the people who have difficulties at university, one of the fundamental things there is that we're not examining oracy. We're not examining speaking and listening, and that's where people in a seminar situation start to crumble. Now, there are two people that this excludes. Firstly, it excludes the people whose schools, who curricular debating can really benefit, who are often the most labeled as the most disruptive pupils in the class. They're the ones who are always sent out, often because they have that skill of talking back, of arguing, and what they need is more of a structure for doing that.
Anyone on this panel?
We've got to get up for debate in Scotland again. I was at Madras College in the 1990s. We had a great debating program there, but it was all extracurricular. We need to bring debating into the curriculum, and I would suggest that we need to have 50% of almost every subject involving oral assessment, and that 25%, for me personally, I think 25% should be debating, which is peer assessed and teacher assessed throughout the year. And I think that would fundamentally change a huge number of things about who is seen as the most able students, who's and areas in which people need to improve, and will really set people up then for university and the modern world. Sorry, Sam.
Yeah.
No, it's okay. Actually, I agree with you, Harold. I think that if you ever go into a school where they've got a debating club, a public speaking even, the kids are far more confident, and they also get to see a range of different. When they go to other schools to do their debating, they get to see another world, and it's a fantastic thing for working class kids to do as well. Interestingly, spoken language has been dropped. Now, I know a lot of English teachers will be happy about that, but in the blog that I wrote for Exam Scotland, I just feel that, speaking and listening is just the poor relation, and it really is. And I think that when Curriculum for Excellence came out, it was all about across the curriculum, and there's tons of subjects that you could actually measure speaking and listening in. They do it very, very well. Social subjects, for instance, they do it excellently there. But why isn't any of that captured? But the thing I wanted to go back to was who benefits from exams, and in my experience, yes, middle class kids benefit. Yes, kids whose parents can afford a tutor. Also, working class kids whose parents are either educated themselves or who are interested in bettering their kids and giving their kids a better life than they did. That was the kind of upbringing that I had. But do you know who it disadvantages, apart from poorer kids, etc.? Kids who are not well, kids who are long-term sick, kids who have chronic illness and can't necessarily always make it into school, kids in the care system. In my experience of teaching, these are the heartbreaking stories, because these are pupils who have got brains, who've got the really clever kids, and they don't get the opportunity. They're left behind.
They also then are the people who, of course, turn up in my college classes and do brilliantly.
Yeah, that's right. You get them the following year.
And do brilliantly. But every single year that I've taught in further education, I have sat in a higher class looking at a room full of people and thought, okay, right, there's always a few who you say to them, how come you're all here? And you always get a few who go, I just messed about in school, totally my fault, right? and fair play to them, right? I've got a lot of respect for that. But every single year I find myself sitting there looking, thinking, a good chunk of you have just been failed. Just completely failed by this system. There are people in here who've been carers and all these kind of things, and we just don't really care about them. That's why. The system doesn't really care about them.
See, even when we look at things that we have done across Scottish education that was about doing things better, take developing the young workforce, and then what did we do with it? We then introduced foundation apprenticeship awards, and then what did we do to them? We made them equivalent to a National 6. So we made them equivalent to higher, and again, slammed the door on the youngsters who, in actual fact, would want that could have been their gateway into the profession.
This obsession obsession with equivalences. Yeah.
Madness. But in actual fact, what we should have is things that have a value and are worth because they're valuable and worthwhile for young people. But it's back to that separating out, and basically the purpose of exams is to have a set of data so you can sort it.
So you can fail some people, fail some kids, tell some kids they're absolutely brilliant because their circumstances stuck them there.
So Raymond, do you want to come in quickly, and then we're actually going to move. I think we've got about a while left, but I'd like to move forward to the future.
Yeah, I'm hearing. I'm hearing four people I completely agree with. I'm having questions about the future. I'm very concerned about the future that we can raise next time. So I'll back off just now and let's move on.
Okay, we've got a few questions coming in, so I'm thinking maybe we're moving on. So these are the criticisms we have of exam systems, and I think they're pretty strident, and there's obviously a lot of anger, but I think this anger reflects the frustration of teachers across Scotland. But there's a question here saying quickly, sorry for blocking people's faces out with the question, it's just the way it happens. So Mark Carver has said, do the panel think there is any value in learning how to pass assessments? Not just performing under pressure, that's one big argument people use, but learning the standards of quality and how to engage with feedback to meet them. So is there any value in learning how to meet a standard and how to do it under pressure, I guess? Go on, Raymond.
Yeah. I think so. The exam system we have doesn't do that. You get an A and that's you. And that A doesn't, in higher English, doesn't tell anybody what part of that course you're best at. Are you best at creative writing? Are you best at responding to literature? Are you best at answering questions in a passage? So it doesn't provide any feedback that people can then work on. Of course, I think absolutely. When we share with pupils what standards are, what criteria are that demonstrate success at this particular skill, then, and as someone earlier, I think Harold was saying earlier, then revisiting that to demonstrate competence in that skill, that's fine. I mean, that's pretty standard ongoing formative assessment.
You know what the most frustrating thing about it is as well, is that, because this is English that we're talking about here, as specifically as possible. The really frustrating thing is that we actually do have courses that are much better at that.
Yes, absolutely.
So as a teacher in college, I do higher and do National 5, and I've done National 4s and stuff. I also teach the higher equivalent communication and literature course.
Yeah, absolutely.
It does these things. People write me an essay and they get it back and they have to fix it. And that's how it works. I was actually, you know what I was doing today? We were talking about listening. I was doing my classes today. I was teaching them, here's how we're doing listening, showing them how to summarise an actually useful skill. Here's how to analyse the sort of spoken word, all that kind of stuff. We actually have courses that can do this. But they're not seen as this gold standard because they don't have this horrendous exam at the end. And ultimately, the reason that the communication course is not seen as being as good as the higher, even though it counts as an equivalent, if you want to go and be a teacher, you can use it. The reason it's not seen as good, if we're dead honest, is because it doesn't fail people as much. It doesn't fail as many students.
Absolutely.
The other thing as well is we have a course further down the school that does this, and it's called Broad General Education. And I just always feel really disappointed that when they get to the end of third year and we can do some fantastic things with them, and then it's like, go, now you have to get ready for exams. And it's just, it almost rips away everything that you've been trying to achieve over the last 3 years, and also their time at primary school. It just beggars belief. I'm an advocate of standard grade in the sense of, if we have to have exams, let's have exams where there's a safety net for kids. Let's have an exam where there's actually a chance for kids to perform at the level that suits them, but also a chance for them to go for it, and not to just be held back. And see the amount of pupils, if they're told they're National 4, their head goes down and they're just like, oh, what's the point then? Because they know the stigma that's there.
Karen Porter raises a very important topic on the chat about particularly if regarding listening and talking, she was saying some people will never be confident holding forth. This is something I feel I need to pick up on, because I think I'm really bad, actually, despite the fact that I do a lot of it, at listening and talking. I don't listen nearly enough. And actually, I talk far too much, and I talk far too stridently a lot of the time. Now, in some ways, actually, I think I probably do reasonably well at an assessment in that way. But there are other people with a much a more introverted personality who should be assessed and able to be assessed as being excellent, but in a completely different way from someone who, like me, is more strident, tends to get in there, tends to be much more combative about the way that I talk. And I think that's something that our exam system doesn't do well at the moment. I think we should have different types of assessment that people could offer up. We should have, for history, the option of making a documentary about a topic, the option of giving a lecture about a topic, the option of writing an essay about a topic, or the option of designing a really well-designed text with graphics and with images, or a website. Absolutely. And you can assess all of those for subject knowledge at the same level, but you can recognize that each of those activities is in a different medium, which also has standards of excellence, but which certain pupils might want to choose. There might be a requirement that across a range of subjects, they actually have done at least 3 of those, or something like that. But we shouldn't expect that everyone has to do exactly the same things and be great at the same things. And I think so. Thanks to Karen for raising that.
That's one of the best English students I ever had. Came into my class and could sit and talk to me about literature and about language, and could have sat there for hours. And frankly, I said this to them, was much better than I was at their age. Much better than I was at their age. I walked out of school with 5 hires, 5 A's, because of where I grew up, frankly. But this student was much better than I was at that age. Frankly, was not a million miles off where I am just now in some of our understanding of things. But the system that we have makes no allowance for that whatsoever, despite the fact that actually it's at least as valid to be able to discuss it as it is to be able to rattle down some quotes. And in fact, it's more valid than it is to rattle down some quotes in 45 minutes. And a bit of investment, and we're simply not prepared to do it. So we'll just chuck those kids.
So I'm going to try and move this on. That's really great points from everyone. I think actually Karen's point that Harold referred to before, I'm just going to read out what she said, because I think it can move us on to thinking about the future. So Karen says, if we are setting kids up to fail, especially kids who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, because we stipulate they need to be examined in their speaking ability, we've just swapped one inequity for another. And I think the point is that whatever the examination system, if you set a solid standard, there will always be kids who do better at it, and the kids who come from families who have the resources to will adapt to always pass that exam, whatever the standard is. I guess the question is, can we design an exam system that would benefit different sorts of children? I'm just kind of thinking of this next question. Who should qualification systems benefit? I'm just thinking, for example, of that example of the GCSE language task that was to write about your skiing holiday, right? What if examinations were all about how to, and this is horribly stereotypical, but how to feed a family of 5 for under £50 a week, or about the experiences that aren't elite experiences.
One of the best close readings was one about football. It was called Resilience, I think. It was a few years ago, and the kids did really well on it. Lots of boys did really well on it, and I know there's lots of research about close reading, and if you understand, the context, you can do far better, obviously. But that there was a subject where lots and lots of people could relate to, and it was one of the best papers. It was one of the ones that was done the best. So let's have let's have more an egalitarian approach to setting those papers. Maybe we need to have different people. Maybe we need to have a kind of, I joked on social media recently about having a kind of elected group of representatives from teachers on the SQA, but maybe we should. Maybe it needs to be something that's actually happening on a regular basis, that people aren't getting too stuck in their ways,
But I wonder if everything suddenly, social realism and people doing these sorts of things, you would have middle class students with tutors from deprived areas explaining what these words mean. And so can you design an exam system, a qualification system, which is fair, or is this whole idea of fairness? You know,
I think you can design systems that, at the very least, if you're putting this out on the public procurement, then you're saying the very least you can't, have any inequity inbuilt into the system.
Yes.
And I think that what we need to do is we need systems within that system. It cannot be the same approach for every type of discipline.
Yes.
So the kind of things that you might want youngsters to be able to demonstrate, and I think that's what we're looking for, an exam system where young people can demonstrate what they can do, where young people can demonstrate that how they can work, their knowledge, their understanding, and their skills. And you can't do that if the same thing is going to apply to, the technology course, that's going to apply to the English course that applies to a modern language. It has to be different.
Yes.
And the courses need to be different. The courses need to be far more flexible, and therefore the exam system needs flexibility within it. And I think Harold's description of, that history course, then all that media that can be used by the young person to demonstrate what they can do, that's the system in a nutshell.
Yeah. I think really if the question is, can you build a system that can that can sort of ameliorate or obliterate all the kind of the stuff that sits behind it, all the socioeconomic stuff, then the answer is, of course you can't, and that's a ridiculous situation. I mean, there's no way. We know that the link from socioeconomics to educational output is essentially a straight bloody line, right? That doesn't mean that you can't make the system better, because as much as it's not the case that, so when I write articles, one of the common comments that comes back to like the government and SQA and stuff like that is that, the system is not what generates the attainment gap. The attainment gap comes from socioeconomics, et cetera, et cetera. Now that is true, but it doesn't mean that we have to have a system that makes everything worse, which is what we have just now, right? Nobody is ever going to convince me that you are going to, for example, get rid of the attainment gap without getting rid of socioeconomic gaps. If you have poverty in society, you'll have people who are not doing as well in education because there are big, massive things about poverty that stop you doing well, right? Not complicated, not hard to understand, but the system as we have it at times looks like it has been designed to magnify those effects as opposed to try and mitigate them. And ways in which you could mitigate them might, for example, Harold's idea might include that sort of thing. It's about options, and I am also 100% convinced what Isabel's saying. This idea that everything must have some sort of like comparable transferability, and so we're going to have to tell ourselves that a B in higher music is the same as a B in higher English. I mean, give me a break. It's so obviously not true. And we spend so much time jumping through hoops that are designed to make it look like it is true, but we know it isn't, and everybody knows that it isn't. And a wee bit of honesty about these things in the system could actually go a really, really long way on things like this, because so much of it happens just because at the end of the day, a lot of us, and everyone's complicit in this, everybody who teaches in the system becomes complicit in it, that ultimately, there are some things that we just feel we need to do. You want an easy life, whatever it happens to be. We're all made complicit in this. We're all made to help fail a certain number of people every single year. We can't do anything about it because we can't control the system under which we operate.
So I don't want to interrupt anyone quickly. Really, really important, James. But we've got the last 10 minutes, and I think we know what's wrong. We know what we'd rather have. And I guess the question is, what is to be done? And as a profession, how would we actually enact some of this change? Can we? Because it's very easy, and I think you were talking about this, James, just before, to fall into this trap of saying it's social economic determinism. The poor kids are always going to fail and the rich kids are always going to do well. And I can imagine, if you reform the system to make it so that you close that gap a little bit, would the people who design these exams and the people in the leafy suburbs say, no, you're taking something away from my children. My children deserve these exam places.
Yes, they
would. And how would you overcome that? Yeah. It's a question. How do we get past that? How do we achieve change in this situation?
Yeah. It's political courage, isn't it? Yeah. It's political courage, and as opposed to what we've experienced certainly in the last 5 to 10 years, and that's political, populism. Almost all policy is about just being popular, and that's not radical, and it doesn't change things. And we could have an entire other broadcast and talk about, closing the poverty-related gap, because I have really strong views on that too. But I think we've got the blueprint for what can be done. And Sammy touched on it earlier. We've got curriculum for excellence. I make no apology for being, quite a groupie around curriculum for excellence. One of the mad early adopters, as we called them then. Curriculum for excellence should have been the answer, in actual fact, because broad general education, making all those links, freeing up the teacher, giving the teacher the ability to use their own flair. And then, what did we do? I can tell you where I was. You talk about where were you when Kennedy was shot. I can tell you where I was the day that Curriculum for Excellence died, and it was the day that Fiona Hislop, who was the Education Secretary, she said, "Oh, don't worry about it, the exams, because the higher will remain the gold standard." And that was the words out of her mouth. That was the death knell, because up to that point, it could have been exciting. And I think those who designed it thought it was going to be exciting. But what we did was we put the old system on top to maintain the status quo.
Yep. You know what I think I would do? Partly because it would upset lots of people. But if people are so obsessed with exams, and if the system says that the curves must be maintained and distribution must be maintained, you know what, fine, to hell with it. It's a terrible idea, but we are where we are, so okay. How about what we just do is we say, see if we're saying that 30% of higher English students are allowed to have an A, which is basically what we do. Fine. But let's, rather than spread it the way we do, let's say that 30% of the richest 10% can have an A, and 30% of the poorest 10% can have an A, and everyone else can have an A. Because see if all we're going to do, I know, but see if all we're going to do is basically decide that we need to sort set people out, and that we need to maintain these curves, and that's what matters is our distribution, not kids, not their life chances, not being honest with them, not actually being proper professionals, none of that. If what actually matters is just maintaining these curves, fine, let's just maintain them, but let's do it in a different kind of way, and let's see how long it takes for middle-class Scotland to go absolutely ballistic about the fact that grades are being dished out based on a curve, because all of a sudden it wouldn't suit the people in charge, it wouldn't suit the richest people in Scotland. Anybody on a year suddenly raging, well, too bad.
I was like, never mind, where was Kennedy? Where were you when Kennedy was shot? Where were you when James McEnaney was shot by, someone wearing Hunter wellies? Oh, great.
I think there are two things that are really important. One of them is that we have got to we've got to come to realise and expect excellence in what our exam board provides us with. Now, just on a very basic level, if you take any of the specs for National 5 or higher and compare them, I'm going to do the unthinkable thing, to any of the GCSE or A-level specs, you will see a huge difference. I encourage you to do it. Go to the Edexcel, AQA, OCR websites. Really detailed. You can take those, as I did when I was teaching in Poland for part of a year ago. You can take them. You know exactly what's going to be in the exam. You know exactly what's going to be expected. That's a basic level. That's a basic level of expecting excellence. We need, we can't expect excellence. We can't expect excellence from the people who gave us the Scottish National Standardised Assessments in such an appalling way for primary schools, with just appallingly designed web pages that didn't work well across different browsers and didn't work well across different screen sizes. That's basic level stuff. We need to expect excellence from what we get from our exam board, and SQA on that basis is not fit for purpose. But what we also need to expect is that we can't move from where we are now to the kind of thing that I would really like to see in one step, because it's so far apart from a system solely based on written exams, solely based on something where the technology is not fundamentally changed in how we do this over 100 years, and potentially move towards a system where we actually might want to reshape things really quite fundamentally. I think we need to consider whether or not literature and functional communication, which includes filmmaking and graphic design alongside copywriting, and language, whether those can all be taught by a single English teacher, whether we need a much more rota kind of based system about how we teach this panoply of skills,
specialism.
and whether or not all of these belong in the same examination. Also, to take the English example, we have English language and English literature as two different things. English, I don't like the English in English literature. What about world literature? Should we be having language, world literature, and some kind of functional communications, which comprises graphic design, filmmaking, copywriting, all these different things? Now that's a fundamental reorganization. That's going to need a huge investment in CLPL for classroom teachers, a huge investment in research, in development, in actual laboratory type testing, the kind that my late father was involved in the 1960s, 70s, when they changed the way that chemistry was examined. They did proper lab testing of whole cohorts and working out what was going to work. That's a whole completely different level to where SQA has operated at the very baseline minimum of what a national qualifications authority really can be expected at. We need to be here.
Yeah.
I know that Raymond wanted to come in on this. Yeah.
I absolutely accept everything Harold's saying. My experience, I know he's got a much greater experience of the English system than I have. But my experience of how schools engage with GCSE specifications is really quite negative. I've seen pupils from the age of 13 be drilled in GCSE questions for 3 or 4 years, and that's as a PGCE examiner. So I take your point about the specifications being much more helpful in a sense, but schools also can use them very prescriptively. But I think generally,
I absolutely don't think, I must be clear, I absolutely don't think that we should be following England lock, stock and barrel, but there are elements, and the precise element there is the PDF that you can download, how useful is it to teachers, and also what other resources are supplied. Cambridge International examinations, who provide GCSEs internationally, you can't actually take them in England, provide a particularly wonderful suite of resources. So I think absolutely we don't want to go down a lot of the roads that England has gone down. We want to move as far away from that as possible. That's why I live in Scotland and not England. But I think we do need to take the best bits and establish an idea of what excellence looks like. Sorry.
No. It's like, I think in a broader sense, again, I'm in total agreement with what everyone's saying. If we want to move away from, but I want to sound a note of caution that's been on my mind for an article I've written for Nate quite recently. And it comes back earlier to what James was saying about education existing within a complete system, within a society. We are in a post-COVID background, and we're also in a Brexit background. And I think both of these are going to have huge implications for what happens next. We know how to do away with exams. We need a bit of two things. We need, as Harold was saying, really well-trained teachers who know how to describe, how to measure and how to describe what pupils do, and can access a range of rich resources in order to do that. Or we need lots of data, as Isabel was talking about earlier on. Those are the two things that help us assess where children are. Now, in the post-pandemic landscape, which of those are we going to get? The giving teachers more authority, more training, more ability to do this is going to be hugely expensive, and we're going to be hit with huge austerity packages, I think. And my worry is that we are more and more we're going to be pushed down a data-led approach where we may not have exams, but we will have lots and lots of internal data points, probably delivered by big ed tech corporations that provide whole packages of learning that are then assessed at various points in the year and provide forward planners, forward steps for pupils, project where pupils are going. And you don't need teachers to do that. The big edtech corporations see teachers merely as functional deliverers of content that they provide. And now that sounds dystopian, but we've already seen it in America. We've already, I've just written about post-2008 in Kenosha, basically the floor fell out their funding, and so they went down a right-wing approach where teachers were basically teachers were sacked and replaced by laptops. Language teachers, a hugely social resource for the most disadvantaged in that community, were wiped out, and they were stuck in front of a lockstep mastery approach program on Rosetta Stone. And I don't think that it's unrelated that 8 years after that, wiping away of those social and educational resources, we saw riots in Kenosha as a result of a shooting of a black man. I think that was in the context of a loss of educational and social resources for the most disadvantaged of society. And given that the GTCS has just got in touch with us to warn us about the Brexit internal market bill, I can imagine that the UK is going to be pushed into a system whereby we deliver those educational outcomes on the cheap, and we see educational technology as, and we see those big educational technology providers as a panacea for a system that obviously isn't working. And that's my big worry. And I'm sorry that that's taken it into this dystopian world.
And over the hour there, so we can continue for another 10 or 15 minutes. I promise we won't go any later than that. We've got some good points in the feed. No, I completely agree, Raymond, and I think actually COVID can be a catalyst for many things and in many different directions, and it's about taking that opportunity to drive it in what we think of as a progressive and useful direction. I'm looking at the English experience, and I'm thinking what Harold's describing is interesting. I think in a way in Scotland we have the worst of both worlds, in that we have a very high stakes, very important to people and very important to the life chances of children exams. But yes, you look at the SQA specifications, and I disagree they're completely divorced from Curriculum for Excellence. I think in some ways they've decided to be more like Curriculum for Excellence. We're going to pretend in the specification that you can do what you want, but then every year we're going to set an exam which is very, very strict and requires very specific skills and doesn't allow you to explore things.
Without just properly exemplifying either.
Yeah, without probably exemplifying. No. So it's woolly while being high stakes. And the other thing you're saying about these tendencies, Raymond, I think sort of if you look at, say, Oak Academy in England, or you look even at the SNSA, this is this kind of gamified, bite-sized online delivery of education, which doesn't really require an expert in the classroom, or at least they think it doesn't require an expert in the classroom. Yeah.
Even
for the last 10... Sorry, James.
Just what you were saying with the SNSAs, for example, which, of course, your online standardised testing system, and I did quite a bit of research on that when it was coming out in quite a few of the stories. But of course, it was delivered by ACER, Australian Council of Educational Research, who I'm sure, by sheer coincidence, had also previously been involved in doing PISA testing. The whole system is just wildly incestuous as well. And these organisations, this is the thing, like. The sorts of organisations that exist that Raymond's talking about, are going to be very, very keen to present themselves as, we are here to help you. They are only here for profit. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine, right? If you want to live in a capitalist system, companies exist to make profit. But don't kid yourself on. Don't allow yourself to be kidded on that they do anything other than that. When you see McDonald's trying doing what looks like big social justice advertising and stuff like that to support campaigns, they're doing it because they want you to go there and buy burgers. And it's exactly the same with any ed tech company. Like, no matter what any of them say, any of them about anything to do with social justice or wanting to help at any of that, they see young people in classrooms as a way to make money, as a way to pay shareholders, as a way to boost the bottom line. And that needs to be right at the foot, which isn't to say that you can't ever have a private company involved in education. But my point about it would always be that as we go into that kind of post-Colerogs, I think a lot of what Raymond's saying is actually right about the risks here. I think that needs to be something that's right, absolutely front and centre, right? Education tech companies are companies. They are businesses. They want money. And what they want more than anything else in the world right now, these companies, is they want public money. Because once you start getting public money, you're laughing. You'll always get it. It'll never disappear. It's literally infinite, right? So if any of these companies are going to start getting public money for this kind of stuff, we need to be super, super careful about the road that we go down with them, and do not, under any circumstances, trust them, ever.
But I think
the best
also,
people, sorry, I was just going to say, the best people to assess our children are their teachers, the people who know them, the people who work with them every day, the people who know their strengths and they know their weaknesses. They're the best people to assess them, not some data cruncher.
Not a spreadsheet.
Yeah. So to bring in that point about teachers, there's a comment here from Lottie Miller, and I think it's a really interesting one because it is something I hear from teachers online and in my workplace as well. They talk about teachers, and some teachers are furious that the National 5, so that's 4th year group this year, aren't going to have exams, and they're not getting, and this is to quote, the chance to show what they can do. And it shows an ignorance to what education and learning should be. And I sympathize with some teachers. In a way, if you've spent 20 or 30 years or 5 years, in my case, teaching an exam, to have that taken out of you, taken away from you, the rug taken out from under you, is a shock. And it's seen as reliable, it's seen as taking away some of the responsibility from you. How do we convince teachers that actually giving them more power is going to be valuable for them? And how do we convince teachers to argue and fight for actually taking power and for taking that responsibility on board, especially when so many people are resistant to it?
There's maybe a wee caveat to add in there, which
that's
is just
going to be a hard. That's going to be a hard job.
Yeah.
Carry on.
That's going to be a hard job to do. It's going to be a hard job to do because teachers have, for the past 4 or 5 years, listened to about being empowered and all about teacher agency, and it's only been words. So the first thing we have is a problem with communication. So I don't blame teachers for being skeptical about any kind of radical change that there would be, and I don't blame them for actually asking. The first question to ask is, what does this mean for me, and then what does this mean for the young people in my class? So I think it'll be an uphill battle, an uphill struggle to talk to teachers and to get teachers on side. In terms of the comment that Lottie had made, I just assumed that was a parent and not teacher, because I've heard that in my community more from parents than from the teachers. It's been about, that's terrible, there's no National 5, my kid's not getting to show.
See, I'm not, and there are big issues with it, but I say that wee caveat I think there might be is that, and there is definitely something in this, is that some people are looking at this and saying, but what about the young people who, and the ones, you've all taught them, the ones who go through the year, right, and they're kind of thereabouts, and you're never really quite sure, and they don't really not going to do very, very well, and they go into an exam and they just do brilliantly. And that kid who was really struggling all year, and they walk out with a B, particularly when, if we accept that teachers are not perfect and not flawless, particularly, what about the kid that feels like the reason they haven't done very well that year is because their teacher, for whatever reason, doesn't like them, or their teacher maybe doesn't get them or engage with them the way they engage with others, because there are unconscious biases. There just are, and there's no getting away from that. And actually, it would be really, really dangerous for us to not factor that in, because that's how you start getting into things like unconscious biases about racial background and stuff like that, unconscious biases about gender, unconscious biases about the kids in care and all that kind of stuff. So there is definitely something to that, and that anxiety that exists. And I agree with Isabel. I tend to encounter it more amongst parents. Is something I can understand. I can absolutely understand it. I think the system that we have doesn't actually address those things. I think what it does is it's a bit of sleight of hand to look like it's addressing those things, and we can do better for those kids. But I understand the concern that would exist there.
We need to bust out.
Go on, Harold. Yeah.
We need to bust open what showing what you can achieve means, and bust it out from being an exam. On Exam.Scot, we've had several people mention the open badges approach, and we should be allowing people to celebrate what they do when it's not in an exam, and that could be because they've done an elective in Shakespeare. I'm very keen that everyone gets their Shakespeare badge, and can have that on their printout of on their roll of what they've achieved during secondary school. I don't really want to examine Shakespeare, and I don't really want it to be a written exam either. I'd want it to be something that they were doing actively. But similarly, they should be allowed to get a badge because they referee a football match and do it very well out of school on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning. They should be allowed to get a badge which is certified by the design technology person because with their family at home they've made some fantastic carpentry, and that should all be stuff that we can celebrate as well. And extracurricular activities, it would be great to see a resurgence of those, because they're another way that you can get through an open badges approach that we can show, yes, our people did this and they did this, but I don't think that has to be examined at one particular day in the summer of S4, S5 and S6.
I think that internal moderation and external verification are really underutilised. I mean, we're talking about the idea of a lot of people might like exams because of the anonymised thing and because, the prejudices. And I get that. I understand that. I do. But why not? Why are we not using each other? Why are we not visiting each other's schools? I was part of something a wee while ago where I got a chance. Sadly, it won't happen now because of COVID, but I got a chance to visit other schools and work with principal teachers in other schools and look at different. It was brilliant, just getting a chance to see other people's way of working, how they do it. We never get the time. And that's as a principal teacher, or the money, as a principal teacher, that's one of my biggest bugbears, because the staff are committed. The staff are absolutely willing to do things like this. We're willing to, raise our knowledge and our expertise and our experience, but we very rarely get a chance. It's often a tacked on, twilight session or a session during an in-service day, and then that's it. There's fantastic opportunities for moderation between secondary and primary, but we need the time. And I think that one of the problems we've got, a bit like when we're in a classroom, for some reason, we won't accept that we need to have time for feedback. Often teachers rush through feedback because they're scared to say we need that time. And I think it's a bit like that in learning and teaching. We spend so much time with the learning and teaching. We don't spend enough time preparing for it. We don't spend enough time talking about assessments, preparing for the assessments, and then actually looking at the assessments. And to me, there's no reason why we couldn't have meetings where people that don't know the pupils come in and look at their work. Why can't we do that? The system, it needs to, it's too narrow at the moment, and it's too convenient for other people, maybe.
Someone told me at one stage that the Finnish Education Union was going on strike because they were threatening to reduce their preparation time from 1 to 1. So, but this is the situation they have where, they have, for every hour of teaching you do, you have an hour of preparation and correction, which in a 35-hour working week with 22.5 hours contact time doesn't happen in Scottish education.
In Scotland, we have the highest contact time basically in the OECD, bar one or two countries, because, as I say, dead easy to stand up as a politician and say, this is our top priority. Significantly harder to actually come forward and do something like address the fact contact time's far too high, and the higher the contact time is, the poorer the quality of the teaching is, because ultimately, again, don't really care.
We can't shy away from the fact I've been unabashedly utopian, and I'm genuinely utopian in this. I don't expect any of the things that I've mentioned in this session to be possible, because we're not at a level where we're spending enough and where we're realizing that education, if we invest in it properly, will pay dividends over the 40 or 50 years. One of the things we have learned from COVID is that actually governments can get immensely into debt very quickly, and that can be justified in innovative ways. What we need to get back to is saying we can justify a huge expenditure on employing 50% more teachers than we have now, on giving teachers far more preparation time than we have, on expanding universities so that departments for education are production houses for the most exciting, wonderful resources, where they have time to create these in collaboration with teachers. But this is utopian, and we mustn't shy away from saying this could be done, because people go, but we don't have the money to it. We have to go, wouldn't it be so amazing if we could do this? Let's make the case for doing that, and let's gradually shift our society to a place where we can actually achieve ideals that seem completely utopian at the moment.
And actually, you know what, we could afford it. There's always money for headlines. There's never money for actually good policy.
Headlines are just taken. But really quickly, right, I'm going to give everyone, have a think about that. I like Harold's challenge to be sort of unabashedly utopian. We're just hitting quarter two. I said I wouldn't go any further than that. How about we got 30 seconds each to kind of make a final, maybe the one thing you would change tomorrow if you were, John Swinney standing up looking a little bit terrified. What would you do to change, the quality of your teaching or the quality of experience of the young people in your classroom when it comes to giving them something they can leave school with and be proud of? I actually really like, at my school, everyone talks about how we used to have Wednesday afternoons was activities. So, and then there's an activities week every week, and they used to just pack off the kids on bikes for the weekend across Skye or take them kayaking somewhere. And I like the idea that you come away with a badge in kayaking, and that'd be worth something. And then you also have your badge in creative writing and your badge in journalism and your badge in this. But then I was a scout back in the day, so maybe that's why. Raymond, what would you change, or your last kind of 20 seconds?
Oh God, I don't know. I think we need to remember. I think we just need to get back to loving what we teach and wanting. Harold said a lot about different ways of testing kids, and he's stressed oracy. I think what's really important for me is that we don't teach kids how to write an essay about Shakespeare, but we teach them to have a bloody good discussion in the theatre bar after they've been to a performance of it. That's what I want to do. And that's what I've always loved doing.
On a drink, right, James?
I would just basically burn the annual exam cycle down to the ground, frankly, because it does so much damage to the kind of teaching that we want to do. It clearly just gets in the way. So the solution has to involve somehow burning it and the organisations which prop it up down, because none of them are fit for purpose.
That's James not getting a job at the SQA. Sammy?
Well, in the short term, I think they would do well to not bring back National 5 now that they've said we're not having it, and give to quote Isabel, give CFE a chance. Give it a chance. Give peace a chance, because actually, if you give pupils and teachers more time and take the stress off them, it's amazing what they can achieve. Amazing.
Harold, your turn.
I would announce a Royal Commission on Education in Scotland to be established tomorrow, and to report no earlier than 2025. Because actually that needs to run alongside these things. We need to, and the key thing about Royal Commissions, that they are so authoritative. They've consulted so widely. They've talked to so many people that at the end result, you can't really say no to the key proposals. And that's what every political party is shying away from. They don't want to establish consensus. We need to have a national consensus on what excellence in education is.
Your national conversation.
Yeah.
New national conversation happened 20 years ago. Isabel, your turn.
If I could rule education starting tomorrow, then I'd be looking for a dynamic system, and I'd be looking for it's almost a mix of what everyone else has said. There'd be no big bang end of year exam diet. I'd be doing away with exam diets altogether, and it'd be a far more fluid, dynamic system. It would be an opportunity for youngsters to demonstrate that they know how to do, but they also can demonstrate they know how to be. So it's about those skills, but about those softer skills. and we actually look at the approaches that already exist, whether it's a kind of project-based baccalaureate approaches, open badges, all of them. I think all of them should be available, and the teacher should be the leader in terms of that learning. The teacher pulls down the most appropriate type of assessment for not only their class, but for individuals within their class. That would be my wish if I could run it.
Well, hopefully we wake up tomorrow and we're all standing in the chamber and we can make these announcements. But in the meantime,
nobody wants that.
In the meantime, we'll still try to make these arguments. Thank you so much to all of our guests for joining us. It was a robust conversation, as I knew it would be. Sorry that it's a week later than it should have been. If you just want to give me a wave and say goodbye, I'm going to have to let you go now. And I'll see you in the theatre bar.
Bye.
Thanks for everything, Tom.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Apologies for that. I've left one person in. There we go. Sorry. And that's just me. So thank you so much to our audience for joining us. That was a fantastic discussion. Again, and apologies to you as well if you were hoping to see us last week and didn't quite make it. This video will be available to rewatch shortly after this broadcast, pretty much as soon as we've gone on YouTube and other places. Just quickly, we are running a series of events all the way through the year, and we've got a few more lined up. Can't quite tell you what they are yet, but please remember to subscribe. Click that subscribe and like button on YouTube in order to get updates as soon as possible when we're going live and on future sessions. We're also on Twitter @SateFeed. If you look at our latest tweet, we also have links to all of our participants from today. This recording will also be sent out as a podcast, so you can listen to that again on your way to work or during one of those marathon marking sessions that I'm sure you're all doing. For now, thank you from me, Tom Coles, your host tonight. Thank you to all the guests that joined us. Have a lovely evening. Enjoy your job, enjoy your teaching, and hopefully pretty soon we'll be able to change Scottish education.